had a couple of thoughts. One was I found myself, looking at y'all's primary two directives, that I think it's separation of church and state, and then the promotion of positive atheism, if I've got those right. Is that right?
Right.
Good. I want to say that I've been watching your show for a couple of years off and on, and I try to catch it on Sunday afternoons. And the reason is that I've learned that y'all do have some very good reason and thought. And, as a believer myself, it's good to understand how to have these kind of dialogues, number one. And number two, in the off event that maybe you don't have something right, you might hear an argument or two that makes you think. And I've actually learned a lot and appreciate the opportunity to listen to your dialogues.
Well, thanks.
Yes, thank you.
One of the things that I wanted to say is that I think that it's dangerous. Dangerous is too hard a word. We have to be careful that when we characterize Christianity is what I'll talk about, but really I think Christians have to be careful when they characterize atheists in the same way. But we have to be careful that we don't paint with this broad brush that misses, what true Christianity is, or what different atheistic, or I don't even want to use the term atheist. I think it's maybe secular viewpoints, maybe, and work with people where they are. And for example, in the area of the separation of church and state, that happens to be something I feel probably just as strongly as you do about.
Okay, well, good.
There's no reason, no business that the church should be in the state in the church, and it really bothers me when I hear people or see people using their faith or their religious position. And I don't know that there's a lot of people that realize there's folks like us out here that don't.
Well, and this actually came up as a question on one of the Facebook groups. So we have the ACA Facebook group, and somebody had posted this. Do you think that separation of church and state is just an atheist issue, or are there theists that agree with this as well? And I had responded that actually there are a lot of theists that agree with separation of church and state. And in fact, the Reverend Barry Lynn is the director of Americans United, which is one of the strongest organizations supporting separation of church and state, and he's an ordained minister. So certainly there are lots of people of faith out there who really don't want the government having anything to do with their religious practices or beliefs. And they don't think it's appropriate for people to use religion as a basis for public policy, because that basically has a lot of overlap into people that may have different religious beliefs or whatever. I'm sure you can think of many different examples of people's religious beliefs that would conflict with your beliefs, and you wouldn't want those to become government policy.
Well, absolutely. And wherever that happens, it's almost certainly done badly. And, I can't think of a good example of church and state. You end up absolutely, you make religion, if you want to call it that, a rule, religion, regulation kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's not good for religion or faith, if you want to say it that way.
Right.
I appreciate that, and we actually have attended protests together with religious groups who believe in separation of church and state, and we're happy to be allies with people who have that as a goal, and we can work together on things like that, and we can disagree on other things, and I don't see that as a bad thing. I think it helps when we cooperate with different groups, whether they're theist or not, if we have a common goal.
Well, and the other piece is, I think, the promotion of positive non-theism, if you want to say it that. I think that's good too. If folks don't accept that there's a God and want to pursue their faith in God, I think that's absolutely okay. And there ought to be positive ways that they can contribute and gather together and do things. I've been watching how y'all deal with
Dana?
No, Dana?
Yeah.
Last couple of weeks. So I'm just sitting here going, it's a real, it's really cool that you'll have these organizations that for folks that aren't at a spot in their life or never will be, they still need help, and they don't need a religious person trying to cram something down their throat that they're not at all ready to listen to. That's just not, in my view, that's not the way Christianity works. That's not the way my relationship with Christ works. And I wouldn't appreciate that either, and it does more harm than good. So I just think that's really positive as well.
Yeah. Well,
I will say this: I do have issue with one thing, though. So, if I can go there, I do think that just as I believe it's reasonable for atheists not to believe in God, I do think that there is good reason to believe in God. And I've come to the conclusion that in looking at other religions and as well as Christianity, that probably Christianity, well, not probably, without a doubt in my mind, Christianity is the only religion left standing, if you want to call it a religion. I even hesitate to call it a religion.
Oh, I definitely would call it a religion. But so, if you had been born in Saudi Arabia, do you think you would still have that opinion?
If I had been born in Saudi Arabia, I don't know, to be honest. There are people in Saudi Arabia that are believers. So I think it would have been more likely that I wasn't.
And I will tell you, I mean, that may not be a great example because the people in Saudi Arabia who are not Muslims, they generally keep their heads down. There are a few Christians, and it's okay, but I mean,
I know some. That's why I can say that.
Non-believers in Saudi Arabia, they definitely keep their heads down.
Yeah,
they can be killed.
Right, and that's the way our world is right now. That's
I mean, the reason I ask that is because part of the reason people profess belief in a certain religion or another has a lot to do with number one, geography, and number two, what your parents believed. So if you're a child born to Christian parents, odds are very high you're going to end up being Christian. If you're born to Muslim parents, the odds are very high you're going to be Muslim, and same for Jewish or Hindu or whatever. So, you can say, well, this is the only religion left standing, but, if you were Hindu, you'd probably think that was, your reasons for believing in the Christian God were not very good. So, just something to think about.
I just think, looking at these, I think from a worldview perspective, there are aspects of those religions that don't stand up to critical thinking. And
we think none of them stand up to critical thinking.
Well, that's a kind of a harsh position. Why do you think that?
Well, I'm a former Christian, and I rejected those beliefs because they didn't stand up to reason and evidence. So after that, I investigated many other religious traditions and found them all equally lacking. But the reality is I was raised a Christian, and once you go through the process of rejecting the beliefs that you were indoctrinated to believe for your whole life, basically that's like the strongest argument you have, and everything else after that is a weaker argument. So the more I investigated other religions, the weaker and weaker they all got. So at some point you get down the list and you're like, okay, everything beyond this is even weaker than stuff I've already rejected, so why keep going?
I guess, and I would say I went through a critical assessment of my own faith as well, and I came out of that with the very firm conviction that it was true, that there was reason and there was rationality behind it.
What was it, Will?
So
what was it that convinced you? If you can say briefly, which may not be possible, but what did you?
No, I think. I mean, I think a believer should be able to say that in an elevator speech. Sure. And it is a lot of things. It's not just one thing. So, but I first looked at what I consider to be the evidence for Jesus Christ's historical existence, and then looking at Christianity's birth and how that came to be established. That has a logical resonance to it, in my view. That doesn't say it's absolutely true, but there are, there's certainly documents and a lot of documents, and those are accepted by most historians. I studied Bart Ehrman's stuff for a while too, and I find his to be a little bit out of the main line. So I don't, I think there are folks that have reason to doubt it, but I don't think their reasons are real good. I think, quite honestly, science, I think, backs up God. Cosmology, I think, backs up that theory. I think evolution, I don't want to get in a long discussion of evolution like we just had.
Well, but the thing is, if cosmology points to a God, why is it that most cosmologists don't believe in a God?
Well, I don't think that's true.
That is true.
In fact, I doubt. I don't think that's true.
That is absolutely true. Most cosmologists do not believe in a God. So
I have read that when you say most, you mean more than 50%?
I mean, like over 90% of them don't believe in a personal God or a God. Period.
I'm not the statistic keeper on cosmologist faith, but I have read a number of cosmologists that are believers. And maybe they're the minority and I just read them, but I don't see a lot of folks that are saying things that I mean, the logic of it even makes sense, that space-time, matter all came into existence.
But if that were the case, then the cosmologists would be, at least acknowledging that, hey, this points to a God, and they're not. They're overwhelmingly saying, that they don't think it points to a God. So these are the people closest to the science who don't believe.
Yeah, I've read some of the science too, and they think it does point to a God. So it just depends which cosmologist you read, I think.
Or if you're willing to accept the consensus of people in the field.
I'm not enough of a cosmologist to know what the large body is, but I've read a good amount on it, and it seems to be consistent that it is supportive of a major creation type event. And I just want to leave it at that. Like I said, there's a number of things. I think, and you made the statement a while ago that there's no evidence for design in nature, and yet people, atheists like Dawkins and others, warn people that study to not get fooled by the appearance of design. So there is as an engineer myself, I'm an engineer, and as an engineer myself, I look at the cell and the body and how things came about, and and I read more and more about it, and the more I read, the more I'm amazed at how it all works together from the chemical, biological.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that sense of awe at looking at something like that, that's not foreign to atheists. It's just that we don't attribute that to a God. And I mean, one of the reasons people like Dawkins warn about, don't be fooled by the appearance of design, is because humans are pattern-seeking animals. And we tend to see patterns in things even when they're not there. So we are easily fooled by things that look like, it's something that should make sense.
I would agree with that. I do agree with that, except I don't think we're easily fooled when we really dig into it.
I think when we dig into it, we're even more easily fooled, because there's this thing called confirmation bias, and people look at it, especially if they already want to believe, they find evidence and they bootstrap it in.
Yeah, but what if they don't want to believe? I mean, there's a lot of folks around, a lot of biological scientists around that weren't Christians and ended up being Christians because of, and they were reluctant. I would say the confirmation.
I don't know if I'd say there's a lot. I've definitely heard that there are some. But.
Yeah, I know that there are some, but the idea that, design is converting people from atheism or basically some kind of, vague beliefs into Christians or something like that is just not true. This is actually creationist propaganda.
Well, I would say that's possible unless you listen to the people themselves say, "Hey, I was an atheist, and now I am a believer."
Yeah, we've actually had people like that call the show. We've had people like that call the show. But the thing is, promoting this as if this is happening wholesale, that more and more scientists are coming to accept design as the answer, that's bullshit, okay? That's creationist propaganda. That is not happening.
I was intrigued last month, and I haven't gotten a full readout on it yet, but the Royal Society in London had a major meeting, and the whole purpose of the meeting was to investigate other possibilities, other methods that could explain life, basically, because the evolutionary synthesis that we've been on for the last 150 years is really beginning to run out of steam. And that was an odd thing, because it was mostly atheists at this, mostly scientists. I would say maybe 20% to 80%, something like that. But it's an interesting thing that we're beginning to seriously look at things that aren't evolution related. Evolution.
Okay, so I knew that there was going to be a creationist. Yes, I knew there would be a creationist who would call at some point or contact us and completely misinterpret what that meeting was all about. What they were looking at were some, so traditionally in terms of genetics and evolutionary changes, we've looked strictly at DNA and genes, okay? And what they were saying is that there may be some non-genetic or not traditional genetic methods of changing that don't currently fit in with the current evolutionary synthesis, the modern synthesis, and that we need to expand beyond that. It was not bootstrapping a god into evolution.
No, and I don't want to do that either.
Okay.
Okay, I am not.
So what they were talking about was, is it time to start considering epigenetic changes as a driver of evolution?
Yeah, or to understand what the epigenetic, and I don't even, I just got my first book on that yesterday, so I haven't even begun to read it yet. But we're off in this topic. I'm not a genetic scientist. I'm trying to understand it. But you asked me why I believe. That's how I got off in this, and I find this really fascinating. And you know what? At the end of the day, I don't know that it really matters in terms of my belief. And probably your atheism either, whether evolution is true or not.
Yeah, I mean, evolution, if somebody came in and completely overturned evolution tomorrow, I'd be like, okay,
I still wouldn't believe. I still wouldn't believe in a God.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so it's kind of I guess it's a little bit of a red herring in some. Yeah. Although it can. You ask what support it fits into my worldview, that way, I guess.
Yeah.
Those are you asked me why. I will give you those 3 or 4 things. I probably got 5 or 6 others, and when I put it all together, I kind of go, it's more reasonable than not. And then as I start to add my own personal experience to it, and that comes in after the fact, I'm absolutely, and I want to be very careful here, Jen. I really, because I had wrestled with this hiddenness issue, and I still do, quite frankly. Why is God so hard to? Why isn't it more plain? I guess.
Yeah.
And I don't have an answer for that. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's good that you're. I think it's good that you're reading on this, and you're reading books from people in the fields, and you're trying to understand this. I think that's to your credit. I would caution against confirmation bias and that's something that we all do. Nobody's immune from that.
Right.
But I think the more you learn about, and we're not evolutionary biologists or cosmologists either. We just, we just take what we read from a layman perspective and try to understand it too. So, I think it's good that you're, rather than just saying God did it, I don't want to. I don't need to learn anything else. I think it's good that you're trying to understand this stuff and put it in some kind of framework. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess the last thing I would say is it's really dangerous to get over emotional about this too.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially for Christians. That we tend to bring in, these fancy services and get people all pumped up on music and feeling good and tell great stories about Noah's Ark and stuff to kids and get them to love, and we completely, then we stop, we don't even really get them to think critically about why they believe what they believe. So I just think Christians, as a rule, have to, they really need to think about what they're doing. So
right.
In a lot of cases.
Well, hey,
okay.
we've got
thanks. Good.
Yeah, we got a few more calls, and so thanks for your
good
call.
Conversation. Thanks a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will.